The eyes that watch you eventually begin to see themselves. And that's the part they can't live with. Let that sink in for a second, because here's a fact. More than 60% of people recruited into covert harassment programs end up quitting within the first year, not because the mission failed, but because their conscience did. They step in thinking they're joining some low-risk surveillance gig, maybe even feeling powerful like extras in a spy movie. But what they don't expect is you. They don't expect to shadow someone whose resilience reads like scripture, whose silence feels louder than their orders, whose existence throws their whole moral compass into question. And that's where the suspense thickens, because every single one of those eyes trained on you, every stranger in the grocery aisle, every car parked too long on your street, every fake smile they rehearsed, all of them started to crumble when they realized the target wasn't breaking down. They were. The watchers became the ones who couldn't sleep at night, jumping at shadows, checking over their own shoulders. It's almost ironic, isn't it? They thought you were under the microscope, but somewhere along the line, the experiment flipped. They became the rats in the maze. The very assignment meant to destroy you ended up dissecting them instead. And honestly, it's a little funny. Imagine signing up for what you thought was the world's easiest side hustle. Just follow that person around. Nothing too serious, only to end up spiritually shook, emotionally bankrupt, and begging to be released from the very job you thought would give you control. That's not just karma, that's poetic comedy in motion. Chosen ones, each person that was sent to gangstalk you wants out, not because they suddenly grew hollows, but because what they saw while standing in your shadow terrified them more than any order they were given. And tonight, we're going to pull that curtain back and break down exactly why. Number one, they entered the assignment thinking it was harmless surveillance, but encountered your reality instead. Most of the people who were sent to watch you never thought of themselves as villains. They weren't cartoonish bad guys twirling mustaches. They were regular people, neighbors, co-workers, friends of friends, sold a story about you that made them feel justified in their assignment. They were told you were unstable, dangerous, or secretly guilty of something. The job was presented as simple: keep an eye, report what you see, nothing more. It sounded harmless. It even sounded like public service. But the first crack in their belief system appeared the moment they actually spent time observing you. What they saw was not a threat, but a human being. They saw someone getting up every day and living their life with dignity, despite pressure they couldn't even imagine. They saw you treating strangers with kindness, minding your own business, holding yourself together when most would have broken. The longer they watched, the harder it became to hold on to the script they'd been fed. Their eyes started to catch the lies embedded in their orders. Their hearts started to pull at them. Some went home at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying your actions in their head, trying to reconcile what they'd been told with what they were seeing. This was the beginning of the collapse. When a person's direct experience contradicts their orders, the human conscience starts to fight back. It's no longer an assignment, it's an inner trial. They start questioning why such a person would need to be monitored at all. They start wondering about the people who gave them the job. They start realizing that they're not protecting society. They're part of something ugly, something that might even be criminal or spiritual in nature. That awareness burns like acid. Some of them cracked under the pressure quickly. Others tried to numb it with excuses or money. But the truth kept seeping in. You weren't who they were told you were. Each day your steadiness acted like a spotlight on their own dishonesty. The mission that began as a paycheck started to feel like a moral debt. That's why they want out, not because they suddenly became saints, but because looking at you too long forced them to see themselves, and what they saw was unbearable. Number two, your energy exposed the true nature of their handlers. They were handed a script about you before they even began. It painted you as a person to be feared, someone unpredictable, someone who needed to be controlled. The people who recruited them made sure to feed them just enough twisted information to build a false image of you in their minds. That false image was supposed to keep their conscience quiet, to make them feel like they were doing something noble or necessary. But the moment they stepped into your space, that illusion started to dissolve. In your presence, their instincts began to contradict their instructions. They were told to expect chaos but found composure. They were told to expect aggression but found patience. They were told to expect manipulation, but found authenticity. This quiet contradiction hit them harder than any confrontation ever could. It shook the foundation of what they thought they knew, not just about you, but about the people giving them orders. Their loyalty started to wobble. Questions began creeping in where blind obedience used to be. Your energy wasn't about theatrics or trying to prove yourself. It wasn't performance, it was presence. And presence can't be faked. It unsettled them because it revealed a truth they had been avoiding. If the person they were assigned to stalk is nothing like the narrative they were given, then the real deceivers are the ones who sent them. That realization made them look at their handlers differently. They started noticing how little transparency there actually was, how vague the reasons for the assignment were, how much secrecy surrounded the entire operation. Once doubt takes root, it spreads fast. Some of them began talking quietly to each other, testing whether anyone else saw what they were seeing. Others withdrew, trying to distance themselves from the job without drawing suspicion. All of them felt the same unease building. If the target isn't guilty, then who really is? That single question became a doorway they couldn't close. This is why so many of them want out. Being near you didn't just change their view of you. It forced them to see the corruption in their own chain of command. You didn't convince them with arguments. You didn't need to. Your existence and your energy did the work for you, exposing lies without a single word. And once that exposure happened, there was no going back. Number 3, the surveillance became a mirror of their own shadows. Following you forced them into a strange kind of self-confrontation they never expected. At first, they thought their task was just to watch, report, and move on with their lives. But as the days turned into weeks, something shifted. Instead of observing you, they began noticing themselves. Every time they wrote a false report, every time they exaggerated your actions or twisted your words, a small crack formed in their own self-image. They couldn't ignore it. By shadowing someone who stayed grounded and consistent, they started to see the gap between their assignment and their own values widening. Your steadiness worked like an unspoken truth serum. Without trying, you made them aware of how far they had drifted from their own integrity. They caught themselves feeling envy at your self-control, shame at their deception, and confusion about why you seemed more free under pressure than they were without it. The mission was supposed to expose your flaws, but instead it highlighted theirs. Their life choices, their compromises, their motives, all of it surfaced under the silent pressure of being near you. For many of them, this was the first time they had to watch their own shadow so closely. They began questioning not just the job, but the kind of person they were becoming. It's hard to stalk someone every day and then go home and act normal. That split reality gnawed at them. Some tried to numb it with distractions or rationalizations. Others started feeling a heaviness they couldn't shake, an invisible weight pressing on their chest, a growing sense of guilt they couldn't explain to anyone. By sticking to your own path and refusing to break, you unknowingly turned their assignment into a mirror. They couldn't escape it. They weren't just looking at you. They were looking at a version of themselves they had been trying to avoid. This is why their loyalty to the operation began to fracture. It wasn't just about the lies they were told about you. It was about the lies they were telling themselves. In the end, you became a living test of their own humanity, and the more they failed it, the harder it became to stay in the role. Number 4, they realized they were pawns in a spiritual war, not a civic duty. They went in believing they were part of something official, something with a badge of legitimacy stamped on it. For some, it was pitched as a government initiative, a public safety precaution, or even an act of social justice. Others thought they were helping a corporation protect its interests. The language was always clean, clinical, and vague. Nobody told them outright that they were about to step into something far more corrosive than a surveillance job. They thought they were defending the public from a threat, but the longer they stayed, the clearer it became. The threat wasn't you. The real threat was your influence, your voice, your ability to wake others up simply by existing. This is where the assignment crossed a line they didn't see coming. What they were really participating in wasn't law enforcement or community protection. It was spiritual suppression. It was about making sure one awakened soul didn't ripple through a sleeping crowd. Your presence, your ideas, your light, those things had the potential to spread, to spark others, to make people question their own programming. And for the people pulling the strings, that was far more dangerous than any crime could ever be. Slowly, they began to notice how nothing about their orders lined up with legal protocols or civic ethics. The secrecy was too heavy, the instructions were too personal. The goal wasn't to investigate, but to destabilize, to isolate, to break down. That realization hit some of them like a punch in the stomach. They weren't upholding justice. They were serving an agenda that had nothing to do with truth. That was the moment the job stopped feeling like duty and started feeling like complicity. For many, it was a spiritual shock. They began to feel an unease they couldn't name, as if something inside them was warning them that they were on the wrong side of a much larger battle. The money, the orders, the sense of power, it all started to feel hollow. They weren't protecting society. They were helping silence a person whose very existence threatened the system's control over people's minds. That was the turning point. They no longer saw themselves as protectors. They saw themselves as pawns. And pawns, once aware of the board they're on, will do almost anything to escape it. Number 5, your daily life became their silent sermon. They were sent with a clear mission: disrupt you, provoke you, and collect proof that you were unstable or untrustworthy. Every instruction they received was designed to chip away at your composure until you cracked under the pressure. Yet the more they tried to unsettle you, the more unsettled they became. Instead of the angry, chaotic person they were told to expect, they met someone who moved with discipline, who stayed calm under tension, who chose grace over retaliation. Every small action you took, how you greeted strangers, how you stayed consistent in your routines, how you refused to descend into bitterness, became its own quiet rebuke to their orders. Your life became a sermon they couldn't tune out. You weren't preaching at them, you weren't trying to prove anything, but your steadiness spoke to something deep inside them. It told them they were on the wrong side without you having to say a word. This was more powerful than confrontation because it bypassed their defenses. Arguments they could dismiss, but what they witnessed day after day, the self-control, the patience, the refusal to become the caricature you were painted, as worked like a truth hammer on their conscience. Many of them started to feel exposed, as though every time they wrote a false report or staged an incident, they were the ones being recorded. Your consistency stripped away their justifications. They couldn't label you what they were instructed to label you. They couldn't get the reaction they were supposed to provoke. It was like trying to start a fire with wet wood. The sparks kept dying in their hands. That quiet failure shook them more than any confrontation would have. Slowly, some of them began to admire you, though they couldn't admit it out loud. Others started to resent their own weakness, realizing they lacked the same strength they were trying to break. But the outcome was the same. Their assignment became unbearable. They no longer saw you as a target. They saw you as a measure of what they had lost in themselves. That's why your daily life, your habits, your choices, your grace preached louder than words. It was the sermon that dismantled the entire narrative built against you and left them with nothing but their own guilt staring back at them. Number 6, they witnessed unexplainable protection over you. They were trained to believe that you were vulnerable, isolated, and easy to corner. In their minds, the plan was simple: apply enough pressure, orchestrate enough inconveniences, plant enough seeds of chaos, and you would break. But what they began to witness shattered that assumption. Over and over, plans that seemed airtight fell apart without explanation. Accidents that should have harmed you missed by inches. Opportunities for them to humiliate or expose you mysteriously slipped through their fingers. It wasn't just bad luck, it was a pattern, and patterns can't be ignored. Each failed attempt was a quiet warning they didn't know how to interpret. Cars that were supposed to block your way broke down. Lies they tried to spread about you ended up unraveling before they gained traction. People they thought would turn against you unexpectedly defended you instead. The very infrastructure meant to corner you began to betray them. These weren't grand miracles with flashing lights. They were small, consistent disruptions, just enough to unsettle their certainty and stir their fear. That fear was a shift. At first, they were afraid of what you might do if provoked, thinking maybe you had some hidden influence, some unseen power. But after a while, their fear turned inward. They started wondering not what you could do, but what might happen to them for doing this to you. They began whispering to each other, second-guessing their orders, hesitating at the edges of their assignments. Some pulled back entirely, terrified not of you, but of the invisible backlash that seemed to follow every attempt to harm you. This wasn't just superstition, it was lived experience. They saw people around them, other operatives, even supervisors, facing inexplicable setbacks after crossing certain lines with you. Health issues, sudden losses, reputations collapsing, life unraveling in ways they couldn't connect on paper but felt deep down. That invisible consequence was louder than any warning you could have given them. You didn't have to fight them. You didn't have to threaten them. The unseen protection around you became its own language, a kind of silent perimeter they couldn't breach without cost. And that's when their fear changed shape. It stopped being about your reaction and started being about the invisible hand they felt closing around their own lives every time they crossed you. That's why so many of them wanted out. They realized they weren't just fighting a person. They were fighting something far bigger, and they were losing. Number 7, their compensation stopped feeling like payment and started feeling like blood money. At first, the compensation felt like a reward. It was pitched as easy money or a harmless perk for doing a job that seemed routine. Some of them even bragged about it privately: extra cash, favors, access to things they couldn't normally afford. But the human conscience is not a vault, it leaks. And over time, every deposit of money, every favor accepted, began to feel like a stain they couldn't wash off. What was once a paycheck started to resemble a receipt, a record of their participation in something ugly. They went home with pockets heavier, but hearts weighed down. Lying awake at night, the money didn't feel like security anymore. It felt like evidence. Evidence of their betrayal, evidence of their moral compromise. Every time they spent it, they thought of you. Every time they held it, they thought of what they had done to get it. It didn't matter if the amount was large or small. The effect was the same. The compensation had become a physical reminder of a spiritual debt. Some of them tried to justify it. I'm just following orders. It's not that serious. Everyone does it. But those excuses began to ring hollow. They noticed their own lives becoming restless, relationships strained, unexpected illnesses, a general sense of being cursed. For some, it showed up as nightmares, for others as a loss of peace. No matter how they tried to hide it, the money burned in their hands. This shift was crucial because it stripped away the last illusion of innocence. As long as they believed they were helping, the payment felt clean. But once they realized what they were part of, character assassination, harassment, spiritual containment, the money turned toxic. It no longer felt like income. It felt like blood money, a payment for harming someone who had done nothing to deserve it. And that recognition was unbearable. This is why so many of them want out. They aren't just leaving because of moral guilt. They're leaving because the payment itself became a trap. It no longer represented freedom or security. It represented a contract with something dark. And once they saw it that way, they couldn't spend it without feeling contaminated. It was no longer currency. It was confession. Number 8, you became the test they didn't know they were taking. They thought they were just doing a job, running an assignment, nothing personal. But what they didn't realize was that every move they made toward you was exposing the state of their own soul. You weren't trying to test them. Your existence, your steadiness, your refusal to play the role they'd scripted for you did it for you. Each action they took, every lie they wrote, every trap they set, every whisper they spread was like a question to their own conscience. How far are you willing to go? At first, most of them didn't see it. They brushed off the tension, thinking the discomfort was just nerves. But then something began to happen. As they pushed against you, they started to feel the pushback wasn't external, but internal. They felt the tremor in their own chest when they crossed certain lines. They noticed how small everyday acts of deception started to feel heavier than they should. For some, it showed up as shame. For others, as a kind of self-disgust. The mask they were wearing began to slip, not in public, but inside themselves. What made it so powerful is that you didn't retaliate in the ways they were prepared for. They expected outbursts, breakdowns, retaliation, anything they could record as evidence or use to justify their actions. Instead, you stayed rooted. That steadiness turned their assignment into a mirror, and the mirror showed them parts of themselves they didn't want to see. Some failed spectacularly, lashing out and crossing ethical lines they swore they'd never cross. Others broke down, privately crying because the guilt became too much. A few quit entirely, unable to reconcile who they thought they were with what they were being asked to do. What they didn't understand until it was too late is that the operation wasn't just a campaign against you. It was a sorting process for them. It revealed who still had integrity, who was willing to sell it, and who had already lost it. You weren't the only one under observation. They were too. By standing your ground and refusing to become what they accused you of being, you became the test they didn't know they were taking. And in that test, some lost, some cracked, but none walked away unchanged. Number 9. The mask of anonymity shattered when you saw them spiritually. They had been promised invisibility. The way the operation was structured gave them a sense of safety. Coded names, burner phones, staged roles, unmarked cars. They were assured that you'd never know who they were, that they were nothing but shadows in the corner of your life. That anonymity was their armor. It let them do things to you they couldn't have done if you knew their faces. It allowed them to feel detached, like what they were doing wasn't personal. But at some point, something happened that pierced that illusion. It wasn't about you shouting names or exposing identities. It wasn't even about tangible proof. It was the way you started looking at them, straight through the facade, straight through the mask they thought was impenetrable. There's a kind of recognition that isn't verbal. It's the quiet acknowledgement in your eyes that says, I see you, I know. And that was the moment their entire sense of security cracked. For the first time, they weren't hidden. They were seen not just as operatives, but as human beings, with choices, flaws, and motives. That kind of seeing is deeply unsettling because it bypasses every layer of cover they've built. It's one thing to be caught on camera or named out loud. It's another to be recognized spiritually, to feel that someone has perceived your presence and your intention without evidence or exposure. They had no training for that, no script, no protocol. It was a confrontation with something they couldn't rationalize away. After that, many of them started withdrawing. They lowered their gaze when they crossed paths with you. They avoided eye contact. Some even tried to switch assignments. The moment you saw them spiritually, they felt stripped of their power. They could no longer convince themselves they were invisible or justified. The mask wasn't just broken, it was gone. That realization haunted them. Without anonymity, they could no longer hide from the reality of what they were doing. They weren't just faceless agents anymore. They were individuals complicit in harming someone who had done nothing to them. And once a person feels seen at that level, the game changes. Their confidence erodes, their loyalty wavers, and fear takes over. Not fear of you attacking them, but fear of being fully known. And that is far more destabilizing than any confrontation ever could be. Number 10, they witnessed that hurting you brought consequences they couldn't escape. At first, they believed there was no cost to what they were doing. The assignment was presented as clean, compartmentalized, and consequence-free. They could harass, smear, sabotage, and then go home to their normal lives as if nothing happened. But over time, that illusion began to crack. Small disruptions started creeping into their personal lives. Jobs lost for no clear reason, relationships breaking down, unexpected illnesses, sudden financial problems. At first, they brushed it off as bad luck or coincidence. But the more they pushed against you, the more those disruptions multiplied, and the harder it became to ignore the pattern. It wasn't about dramatic punishments falling from the sky. It was subtle but relentless. Their own lives began to mirror the harm they were trying to inflict. The betrayal, chaos, and isolation they orchestrate around you started showing up in their homes, their friendships, their health. They saw coworkers who participated in the harassment start losing opportunities. They watched fellow operatives spiral into depression or addiction. Some even began to notice physical symptoms, insomnia, panic attacks, strange health issues directly tied to their involvement. This created an unspoken panic among them. They didn't understand what was happening, but they felt it. The fear shifted from, will this person fight back, to what's happening to me because of this? It wasn't just superstition. It was lived reality. They started connecting dots they didn't want to connect. They began to wonder if there was a spiritual principle at work, a kind of boomerang effect where every act of harm sent out returned to its source multiplied. Some tried to ignore it, others doubled down, thinking if they just finished the assignment, the shadow over their lives would lift. But the opposite happened. The longer they stayed, the heavier it got. Even the ones who didn't believe in karma or divine justice started to act as if they did because the consequences felt too real to dismiss. This was the breaking point for many. They didn't leave because someone threatened them or because their pace stopped. They left because they couldn't outrun what was happening to their own lives. Hurting you became like signing a contract with chaos, and chaos doesn't negotiate. Once they realized that, the job no longer felt like a job. It felt like a curse they had to escape. Number 11, your story became their silent confession. They started out believing the story they were given about you. It was rehearsed for them. Facts twisted, details exaggerated, and motives fabricated to paint you as a danger or a fraud. That story was their shield, the justification that allowed them to do things they normally wouldn't. But as time went on, the cracks in that narrative widened. The more they observed you, the harder it became to reconcile what they'd been told with what they were seeing right in front of them. You didn't give long speeches to change their minds. You didn't plead your case, you just kept living your truth. And that truth spoke louder than any propaganda. Day by day, their inner dialogue started to change. The reports they wrote began to sound different in their own heads. This person is innocent. This person is chosen. This person does not deserve this. They wouldn't dare say it out loud at first, but the words were already there, echoing in their thoughts like a confession they couldn't stop making to themselves. This was the most dangerous shift for the operation because it wasn't just disobedience, it was conversion. They were no longer just watching you, they were silently agreeing with you. Your life became a mirror that reflected their own choices back at them, and in that reflection, they saw the truth they'd been denying. For some, it was like a quiet awakening. For others, it was a gut punch, a realization that they had been enlisted to harm someone whose very presence carried a kind of innocence and purpose they couldn't touch. That's when loyalty to the operation began to crumble. You weren't just a target anymore. You had become a moral compass they hadn't asked for, but couldn't ignore. Each day they spent shadowing you was a silent admission of guilt, a mental courtroom where they were both the witness and the accused. Some started slipping away, refusing new tasks. Others tried to sabotage the operation from within. The narrative that once justified their actions had been replaced by a new one, your story. And once that shift happened inside them, there was no way back. They had already crossed the invisible line from enforcers to reluctant witnesses, and their own thoughts had betrayed the mission before they even spoke a word. Number 12, they discovered they were being watched too. They stepped into the assignment believing they held the power. They were the eyes in the shadows, the ones with the information, the ones doing the watching. That belief gave them a sense of superiority and safety. But over time, subtle details began to chip away at that illusion. Instructions that should have been private somehow leaked back to their supervisors. Conversations they thought were off the record were repeated back to them, word for word. Changes in schedules or assignments happened without explanation, as though someone had been tracking their every move. It dawned on them slowly, but unmistakably, they weren't just the watchers. They were being watched, too. That realization hit like a slow-motion betrayal. They thought they were part of an exclusive inner circle, but instead they were pawns in a game they barely understood. The very handlers who instructed them to keep tabs on you were keeping even tighter tabs on them, tracking their communications, monitoring their compliance, and measuring their loyalty. Some began to notice they were being tested with bait tasks, fake leads, or staged scenarios designed to gauge how far they'd go. The assignment wasn't just about you. It was also about profiling them. This discovery shook their sense of control to its core. They started to understand that they weren't on the inside at all. They were on a leash. The secrecy they once found thrilling began to feel like a trap. The perks and promises lost their shine when they realized how replaceable they were. They weren't trusted operatives. They were disposable tools, and the more they recognized this, the more desperate they became to get out. They began whispering to each other in coded ways, trying to confirm their suspicions without tipping off the handlers. Some stopped following orders as precisely, hoping to fade out of the operation quietly. Others tried to resign, only to discover it wasn't that simple. The thing they thought gave them power had actually stripped it from them. That's why the betrayal cut so deep. They entered thinking they were part of something secret and important. What they learned instead was that the same invisible system trying to contain you had already ensnared them. That realization, being both the hunter and the hunted, was the breaking point that drove many to walk away no matter the cost. Number 13, their assignment turned into an awakening they never asked for. They signed up thinking this was just another assignment, another name on a list, another operation to run. Everything about the briefing painted you as a threat, a problem to be managed, a target to be contained. They came in armored with judgment and detachment, believing they were doing something necessary or even righteous. But the longer they were around you, the harder it became to keep that armor on. Something about your presence didn't match the file, the warnings, or the script they'd been given. That contradiction began to chip away at their certainty. Day by day, their role started to feel heavier. It wasn't simply watching anymore. It was being confronted. Your steadiness under pressure, your refusal to collapse under isolation, your quiet dignity in the face of their tactics, it unsettled them. It began to gnaw at their own self-image. They weren't the heroes of the story they'd been told. They were the oppressors. That realization doesn't arrive in a single lightning bolt. It creeps in through sleepless nights, through small pangs of conscience, through the slow death of excuses they once used to justify their part. And then something unexpected happened. Instead of you breaking under their pressure, they began breaking open under yours. Their assignment became a mirror they couldn't escape. Some began praying again, even if they hadn't prayed in years. Some started seeking forgiveness in secret, whispering apologies in the dark, even if they never said them to your face. Some questioned everything, who they worked for, why this was happening, whether their life had been a long string of compromises that led to this moral cliff. This wasn't just you resisting them. It was you awakening them. Your existence didn't simply expose their actions, it exposed their soul. The very system that sent them to diminish you ended up using you as the catalyst for their own spiritual crisis. For the first time, many of them glimpsed how far they drifted from their own humanity. And that's the irony. They came to police you, to confine you, to silence you. Yet in the process, you became the key to their unplanned awakening. The turning point they never asked for but could no longer avoid. Number 14. They finally understood the real target wasn't you. It was their own conscience. They thought the target was you. Every briefing, every instruction, every whispered command from their handlers pointed in your direction. Watch them, contain them, isolate them. That was the story they were sold. But over time, the cracks in that story widened. The longer they participated, the more they felt themselves slipping morally, emotionally, even spiritually. It wasn't just about you anymore. Something inside them was changing, and not for the better. Every time they spied, manipulated, or sabotaged, it left a residue on their soul. At first they ignored it, chalked it up to stress or the demands of the job. But guilt is patient, and it builds like pressure behind a dam. Small decisions began to weigh heavier. Sleepless nights turned into full-blown insomnia. Some developed stomach issues, migraines, or anxiety they couldn't explain. They thought they were hurting you, but the deeper wound was happening to them, eroding their sense of self, stripping away their ability to see themselves as the good guys. That's when the truth dawned on them. You were never the real target. They were. The system wasn't just trying to suppress your influence. It was testing and shaping them, seeing how far they would go, how much of their own conscience they'd sacrifice, how complicit they would become in harming an innocent person. The operation wasn't simply surveillance, it was corrosion. By participating, they weren't neutralizing you. They were neutralizing their own humanity. For some, that realization came in a single shocking moment, watching you stand unbroken after everything they'd done. For others, it was a slow accumulation of guilt until it became unbearable. But however it arrived, the impact was the same. The spell broke. They could no longer tell themselves they were doing something necessary or justified. They saw clearly that the only thing truly at risk was their soul. And that was the turning point. They didn't just want out of the assignment. They wanted out of the person they had become within it. The same system that thought it could use them to crush your spirit had inadvertently forced them to face their own. And once they understood that, leaving wasn't just an option, it was survival. What started as an operation to break you became an operation that broke them open. Every tactic, every scheme, every whispered instruction was meant to box you in. But instead, it revealed the box they were living in themselves. They arrived as watchers, but ended up being watched. They came as oppressors, but left as people awakening to their own conscience. The money they took began to feel like blood money. The secrecy that once felt powerful began to feel like a prison. The target they thought was you slowly turned into the mirror of their own soul. And that's the essence of what unfolded. You were never just enduring harassment. You were involuntarily standing in as a living test, a moral crossroads, a quiet revolution. Your discipline, your grace, your inexplicable protection, and your refusal to collapse dismantled the narrative around you. Without preaching, you preached. Without fighting, you exposed. Without trying, you woke people up. Even the ones who came to harm you couldn't escape the lesson you carried inside you. This entire journey has been proof of a paradox. The attempt to contain one awakened soul can end up awakening others. They thought they were silencing you, but you were silently teaching them. They thought they were breaking you, but you were breaking the illusion they lived under. The operation designed to erase your light ended up illuminating the shadows in their own hearts. And that is why now so many want out, not because of guilt alone, but because your presence forced them to remember their humanity. You didn't just survive, you transformed the battlefield. In the end, your story is not just about endurance, but about reversal. The hunted becoming the catalyst, the target becoming the teacher, the chosen one becoming the mirror that made even the agents of darkness see themselves. You are living evidence that nothing done in shadows can remain hidden when the soul itself becomes the light. And that's the truth they can no longer unsee. If this video resonated with you, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment of truth like this. Smash that like button to show your support. Comment below with your thoughts or experiences. Let's build a community that sees and speaks the truth, and share this video with anyone who needs to hear it. Every click, every comment, every share helps shine a light on what's hidden and spreads this knowledge further than ever before. Don't just watch, be part of the movement. God bless you.